First of all, welcome to the gallery. It's nice to have so many familiar faces and new faces here at the gallery. This nice winter afternoon.
Morning.
Morning, yeah. So this is so great to have these three artists here at the gallery. It takes me back a long ways. The gallery started, back in 1977, and I think all three of these artists were around at that time at the gallery at different times. Charlie here, Dick, and Cappy. So we go back a lot of years, have had a lot of experiences, lots of different shows over those years, different incidents that have occurred that has guided us along this way. So welcome to the gallery. Of course, you know Dick Weiss here, Cappy Thompson, and Charlie Parriott.
Yay!
I think we're going to let them each talk about their work individually. I think Sarah has a few words that she'd like to add to this too. So.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge what a special show this is for me to get to put together, because these are three artists that I've actually known my whole life.
Absolutely true.
And they have been dear friends of mine and my family's, as well as really important artists in the gallery's history. So it was really fun to work with all three of you on this, and it's really special to have your work in the gallery as a group. And I also just wanted to point out that this is an interesting show in that it's three independent bodies of work. The artists didn't collaborate on any of this work. They worked on their own, because I think of the way that it's installed and having it all mixed up, you start to see these connections between the work and how they're working with symbols and figures and composition. And that's, hopefully you guys will talk a little bit about that and how you're in each other's heads and probably also in your hands. So, yeah. And with that, I think we're gonna ask each one of you to just talk about your own bodies of work, and then Bill and I will ask some questions about how you may have influenced each other.
So, Dick, do you want to start?
All right, I'll start. And I was going to start by saying I have a few notes here because I'm getting old and out of it. But I almost see it as a four-person show. Well, it's a five-person show because the person that made Charlie's things is in Czechoslovakia. Sarah, I was helping Bill hang these little panels, and so I was down here for a few days. I'm usually not during the install. And Sarah tried so hard to find the synergy on this stuff. Every day I would come in, there'd be a different configuration. Screen would be moved, Cap's things would be here, Charlie's things would be there, the lighting would be different. She worked so hard to try to tease out the connections between the three of us that I said, wow, it is. It's almost like the whole show is a Sarah Traver, really, in a strange, sort of interesting way. But she did. It was attaboys to her. And last thing about Sarah, I complimented her once because she does very good designs when she gives out the advertisements for things. And she cocked her eye and she said, Dick, with my parents, how could I not be a good designer? Which is certainly true. Okay, now about me. I've always loved stained glass. A little bit about a Charlie Parriott story on that one, because Charlie has some gorgeous property, old barns, up on Whidbey near Fort Casey. And years and years ago, we walked around the grounds of Fort Casey at night, and it's pitch dark out there. And I think it's a structure, maybe a lighthouse or something up there.
A famous lighthouse.
Famous lighthouse, okay. Pitch dark everywhere. It's gorgeous with the sky and everything. And there was a door in the bottom of the lighthouse that had three small panels of colored glass, cathedral transparent glass, just I think a red, a blue, a green probably. In this dark landscape, those three glowing squares became like an moment for me. It was like, okay, you don't need much more than that. That's awfully beautiful for me. And stained glass works really well for gorgeous treatments. Someone like a Judith Schachter does gorgeous things with everything you need to know about it. Every trick you want, from sandblasting to photo transfers, everything. I sort of went the other way, go uber simple, and try to find the absolute beauty with, you cut this piece of glass, you cut that piece of glass, you put them side by side. The lead line is the little defining fence. let's build a wall, a little wall that separates the two colors, and it's enough for me. It's beautiful. Okay, what else am I going to say here? Every show of an artist that I know of starts with an initial little spark in your head. There's this sort of a smell that maybe this would be a good trail to go down. Ooh, I've got an idea. It's just a tiny little thing. And then you explore that idea. This idea started because, as my friend Walt Learman would say, I decided to steal from myself. And I went back to my early geometric work, which was still recognizable as trees. I did some geometric trees. And I returned to those. I had a show at Traver in the early 80s. We did a little poster of this geometric tree, and I started by returning to that. In the early years, I did a very orange giant screen back when I was still doing huge things with same color, with it looked like a telephone pole with more slabs. So this was like the first tree that I did after that, and I returned to some of those geometric trees. And once you're there, you spin off and you say, come on, get loose, and you do a 60s tree, and they're a little more bubblier than rectangular. I used to do nothing but rectangular art, and one time somebody came into my studio and said, it must be pretty hard to cut a curve. Well, okay. That way about it. Let's see here. All right, that's about that. There's two types of windows in this show. There's the type where I told the glass what to do. This would be an example of that. I had a bit of a design. I cut the glass. Okay, here's what you're gonna do. That tree over there, same thing. All right, I'm gonna do a leaning tree out on the peninsula where we have a cabin. There's a lot of trees that lean over. And they feel so much like a relationship. There's a black and white one in there where the tree's leaning in, lean in against, and this one's sort of leaning away. Anyway, I tell the glass what to do on those. In something like the white screen back there, or these little screens right here, they tell me what to do. That glass in that white screen was, I'll say, cut like that. Cut means euphemistically broken like that. It's from sheet glass from Fremont Antique. Best sheet glass in America is made 2 miles away over here at Fremont Antique by Jim Flanagan. I go to his factory and he blows those bubbles and turns them into sheets, and they were cut, they weren't just broken like that, laying around. I buy them, take them home, play around with them, and the glass tells me what to do. So there's a certain number. Obviously, there's a cutoff of old Spectrum. Back in the day when probably Charlie worked for Spectrum. So that's, yeah, they didn't even square their sheets off, the 2x4 sheets, so you get that wiggly line where it was coming right out of the giant vat. So the glass tells me what to do. Lastly, Jeffrey, who used to work here, we know that it's an investment to buy a screen. They're sort of big objects, and so he said, why don't you try doing little screens? Not screens, little windows. Just do something little. Maybe people will buy the little stuff if they're not buying the big stuff. And so I resisted that because screens are like a novel for me, so you have a chance to really get going. Whereas that's like saying, don't write novels, write a paragraph or write a short story. And so it took a while to pivot. But once I did, you got into it. And I was mostly also trying to satisfy my partner, because Lynn kept saying, when are you going to start those little windows? When are you going to start those little windows? Well, finally, I started the little windows. And you sort of get into it, you move slowly, and they don't have to be rectangular, since they're not in a frame meant to be framed in. You can have any shape you want. It only took me a while to figure that out. And so I started again using the glass. If the glass had that shape, I didn't cut it to square it, I just left it and let it amount. Okay, that's it. Thank you for coming, you guys.
And then we'll let Cappy talk, and then when Charlie talks, we'll move into the other room there.
So this body of work is the first time that I've really worked, well, it's the second time I've worked sculpturally, but this is the first time I tried to make my drawings as figures. And Dick and I have had this wonderful relationship with Pottery Northwest for almost 10 years now, where we've gotten to go in the month of December and kind of hang out there with the resident artists and work. And we mostly worked with underglazes and just rolled out slabs and painted underglazes for quite a long time. But then we also, I took a class in hand building. And then a few years ago, I made an installation for my last show, which was a heavenscape. So I made these clouds, and they were simply glazed, and the figures were smaller. And I had figurines. I wanted to make heaven, and I wanted to have a votive installation where you'd have candles on it, so you'd have to kind of walk through a starry sky before you got to my show. And so that was wonderful. But then this year, most of you know my husband died suddenly about a year ago. And so that was like a super shock and very, difficult time. And what was wonderful I'm so grateful. I had Sarah asked for I got the opportunity to have 2 shows in 1 year. So Dick and I had a show, I think in April or May, of our collaborative painted work, and then we had this show. The 3 of us had been scheduled earlier for November, and working with clay was super grounding, so it's like having your hands in the dirt. So I was able to just calmly approach, it was just a great, kind of super, way to be present with my work. I can say it, thank you. Anyway, then the painting of it was different, because painting is more of a kind of a head activity. You have to think about it. What are you going to do? There were a million possibilities of what they would look like. And so I wanted to, I want to acknowledge Akio Takamori, because he introduced Dick and I really to the colored underglazes and taught us how to work with velvet underglazes. So I knew quite a bit from the work Dick and I had done about how I wanted to approach it. I didn't want the work to be shiny. I didn't want to glaze. I didn't know how simple or complex. So basically I did a lot of just playing with these pieces, sort of painting, wiping it off, painting, wiping it off, until I kind of came. It's interesting because it's sort of the way I work anyways. I'm kind of guided by, well, that's not quite right. So you just keep coming back to it until you've tweaked it in the direction that feels okay. So that's more or less how this body of work came to be. And they are, I've realized over the last, at a certain point you've worked for a long time, and you see, okay, for myself, the kind of, I've made first maybe small changes, and then just like every 10 years a change comes in, because your work, you just change, and your work changes with it. So at first I went from working in stained glass as a stained glass painter to working on vessels and doing narrative vessels with enamels. And then I had an opportunity to work large scale. I did some really big public art things for a while. And then I came back, and the clay came in, and also then I started working on wall pieces that were backed with metal, and working then more with transparent color. Did a body of work that was all transparent color, no black. And now this, but what's the same is the subject matter. So basically and I have this sort of folk aesthetic that allows me to kind of bounce between media and still kind of, find my voice. So I guess, anyway.
Is there any one of these sculptures you could give us a narrative on?
Just probably the easiest ones to talk about would be from my work. I almost always have the sun, the moon, and the stars. Those things. To me, I'm very interested in the connection between humanity and the starry realms. And so this is my moon, and there is my sun. and this is a star. And they basically all kind of came from, this one, I also was looking at, always looked at early references, so I'm inspired by all kinds of folk art, but in terms of the clay, I was looking at pre-Columbian work and all the, maybe stuff from Crete, very early work, and those are all folk, they're all pinch pot, you know, they're all hollow built, and just, so just kind of feeling my way into the drawings. I had done a lot of moons with this kind of like mandorla, or a big, like almost a lace collar, and also looking at Persian images of the moon, where she'd have like a round thick collar, and she'd be have her hands here holding her, and the moon is kind of a mirror. So the whole there are all these charming references. So anyway, that's my embodiment of these kinds of ideas. And there's the sun, and he's, that's Charlie's hands, my husband's hands. There's
All
and then
right.
the little star is from a drawing I did on an engraving.
So we'll have an opportunity to ask other questions, but let's move on to Charlie here, and we can move on into that interior gallery. All right?
Thank you all for coming. It's actually nice to be able to speak about the work a little bit. And I don't live here so much anymore. I've been living in the countryside of the Czech Republic, and that's where these pieces were made. To get back to what Dick was saying earlier about leaded work, the object down here on the wall, the stick man, and then the one just outside the gallery, the gatherer, are back. They're from a collaborative body work that Dick and I did in 2011, and it's hard to say where the drawings come from, like internally, but they came from the fact that I was traveling so much. I couldn't do any studio time, and so I wound up drawing all the time while I was on the road. And that's where all these images come from. It's just from drawings, and basically being isolated away from working with my hands rather than drawing. And what I do right now for a living is I create bodies of work for other people. So I'm in the process of doing some very serious large-scale castings for Preston Singletary and some other people. So these engravings are based on a lot of the drawings that were used in the earlier series with Dick, and I wanted to reinterpret them. And I had some consternation about going back to earlier drawings, but then again, I looked at what some of my colleagues do, and they never get off the bus. They keep repeating the same motifs and stuff, and that always drove me crazy. So I was feeling a little bit of like shyness to come back to these things, but got over that. So essentially there's two groups of work here. This group, where we are over here, was done during 3 days in a glass symposium by 2 engravers and myself. And so essentially they're my drawings, and I become the art director, and then I sit and we're working together, and we're discussing how to resolve some issues using this syntax, this style of embellishing the glass, rather than sandblasting or many other techniques. So the key person in the middle of all this is a woman named Alina Chambalova, and she's about 29 years old. I'll just say she's a master at a very young age of this craft and this school of working. And so we met at Pilchuck on a Halberg Fellowship in 2015, and the Halberg Fellowship was set up by a treatise that Cappy and I wrote, which was 3 accomplished engravers working with 3 accomplished glass artists who don't engrave at all. But the focus was on engraving. So if you don't know what I'm talking about by engraving, it's basically there's 2 bearings in what would be called like a block, a cast iron block. They have bearings, and through them floats this shaft that's totally true, and the shaft is open at one end, and it has a tapered interior, And there's many, many spindles that fit in that shaft that have different grits or different diameters and profiles of wheels. So as you're cutting out various areas on these plates, various radiuses, various diameters, various profiles of wheels give you different results. And so by engraving, I'll just describe it as if Pavlina were doing it, that she's sitting there and she has like these pads under her elbows and these funny little things that keep the water from running down her arms. It deflects the water off her wrists. And there's water coming off the wheel, and she's working, bringing the glass up to the wheel, and her eye is on the profile of the wheel touching the glass. And it's really a delicate art, and it really requires a very good set of hands and eyes, and I don't have a good set of eyes, so anytime I'm going to be doing this, it's like, trying to split a matchstick with an axe. I'm really clumsy at it, but I love doing it. Cappy loves doing it too. So eventually Cappy and I went off to a place over a year ago, and we stationed ourselves in a place called Cesti Sklo, which means glass trip, and it's at an old glass factory in the south of Prague, about an hour and 20 minutes, in a place called Sazava, and it's this place called Hut, which meaning glass hut, František. And it's a very old glass factory that was revitalized by European Union money, and they have glass blowing, they have glass engraving, glass cutting and polishing, large kilns, and about 1,200 pieces from an International Glass Symposium collection. And it's worth a visit. So we bivouacked in there for a couple of weeks, and then we would go see Pavlina for some instruction. And so Cappy and I are, she's more accomplished at this by far than I am at this point, but we love it. It's a meditative process doing this. So so this group was done with an artist named Marek Yersak, who has his own engraving studio in the town of Novi Bor, and Pavlina, who had visited there from Vienna on this symposium, and I hijacked her for 3 days with this guy Marek, and they produced these panels with me during this symposium. And so after that, I really wanted to get back to this body of work. And so finally, Pavlina and I arranged a time to do those pieces. So these pieces were finished about a month ago. And they are still the similar tableaus originally presented like this, in this fashion, the work that Dick and I did together. And so they've sort of like been brought back to life in a grander environment visually. And I think I'm gonna continue to work this way for the next year or so, because I just got so much out of it. And these pieces, as they are, they will look very differently in any other kind of lighting. We're only seeing half of what they are. So, like those windows, in a natural ambient setting, where the light's changing all day, the objects will change all day as well. And with artificial light, you get this one static view of them, but in a natural setting, they change all day. And I have to say that the reason I started working in this level is I was visiting somebody's house in Broadmoor, and I don't remember their name, but they have the most incredible art collection of Northwest art. I mean, the classics, the mystics, or whatever they're called, everybody. And so on the small table next to this person's armchair, there was this little bronze sculpture, a relief sculpture. And I said, "Is that a Philip McCracken?" And she said, "Well, yes, but how would you know that?" I said, "Well, if you know his work, it's totally him, but how did you get that?" And she goes, "Oh, I saw it on his workshop table, and I commissioned him to make it for me in bronze. It was just a little, plaster thing he had there on the table." And I said, I like the size. And I think that size just kind of disappeared when I started working this way. I'm going, oh, this is a great scale to work in. And these pieces I brought with me in a backpack when I came back from Prague a couple of weeks ago. So anyway, that's about it. You know, there's stories in there, and there's, you know, endless things to talk about, but, you know, you can make that up for yourself too.
Can you tell us about a figure in one of these pieces?
Well, since we have the leaded glass windows here, it's easier to kind of visualize that this guy Stickman and then the gatherer who's outside are related to each other. So Stickman is just a character of, you know, like tinder out in the forest. And the gatherer is the guy, you know, like there's that old, I think it was a Led Zeppelin album cover from ages ago of this guy with tinder sticks on his back, and he's all bent over and he's carrying this thing. It's a classic photograph. And in Buster Simpson's Woodman is the next incarnation of that. So it's sort of an archetypal person, you know, somebody who's gathering sticks for fireplaces and selling them. So the gatherer is this guy right here. And Janet, what's the name of the photographer from the German photographer who does all those like very square, straight-on photograph, black and white?
August Sander?
August Sander, yeah. So I booted this from an August Sander photograph of a guy coming up from the basement, and he's got the coal sack. You know, he's the coal stevedore. So he's coming out for more coal. And so that's where he came from. And then the stick guy, he just emerged out of somewhere. But they're related. So the gatherer is always following the stick man, and the stick man is trying to keep, you know, several paces ahead. And so that's why that character is running and sort of looking over its shoulder. And then the gatherer, he's just plodding along over the mountains and through the woods and all that. So that's where they come from. And another one, which is one of my favorites, is this drone here. And this is an embodiment of if these horrible drones that are being used for warfare, if they were embodied as some sort of a character on the ground, it's like, this is who this is. And then there's a little like it's sort of like a virtual marionette on the ground, and there's coordinates here. These lines represent coordinates of a map, and this setup in here is like the fuselage of an old World War II bomber, you know, as if it's just this clear seating place for the bombardier to go for it. And this guy sort of has similar, like, anvil type hands at the end, and it's a golem kind of a figure, not a living figure, a spook, you know, sort of like the scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz is just a spook, you know. There's nobody in there. Take him apart, there's nobody in there, you know. So, you know, that's that.
So Sarah,
Yeah.
when people come in like this audience, or you come, what is the most common question you're asked about a body of work like this?
That's a good question, Barbara. Most common question we're asked. You mean about like a body of work where there's multiple artists?
If they have multiple artists and you're trying to get them to see what it is, what is it that you do then to help them see what it is?
Oh, well, I mean, I think most of that work happens hopefully beforehand and in the installation, and how we just talk about it with folks, whether it's through a press release or our email communications or here in the gallery, and just trying to, I mean, I just try and tell the story of who these artists are and what their relationship is to the gallery, and what that, I mean, we have such an incredible community here in the Northwest, and I think it's inevitable that artists influence each other, and through whether it's just over dinner and conversations and wine and talking about art or sharing stories, or actually sharing time in a studio together and physically making art together. Like, I mean, we see so often, especially with the glass community in particular, those influences, and we hear from the artists about that, but I don't think it's a story that's shared that often with collectors or with the public, and I think it's an important story to tell.
I guess I was getting to that, because I think I came in and I, of course, start to wonder, like, how's that done? But then I also, like, because there is a story, and I'm looking at this story, so I was just wondering if you had really odd questions, or...
Yeah, we do get some really odd questions. I mean, I think some people really don't get it at first, but they spend a little time with it and they start to make these visual connections between things, whether it's just, you know, colors that are being used, or if it's figuration or composition. You know, people draw out their own connections, and, you know, we're not trying to make any specific lines between the work at all. It's just letting people find those connections for themselves.
One of the things that I do is try to get the viewer to slow down. Just slow down. Take the time to look. Take the time to actually study the piece, and bring to it your own knowledge and your own background, bring it to the work, because that's ultimately what you're going to do anyway. And then on top of that, we can add any dialogue or other additional information. But the big thing is, in this setting and in this gallery, then they're becoming somewhat extinct, actually, the opportunity to view work like this, to take the time to actually spend the time looking. Yeah. Any other questions of all the other artists?
Charlie, question for you, a historical question. Being in Prague, you would have been aware of Prague Cubism
Yeah.
in the 19-teens. And
Well,
also,
it's totally swallowed me whole, you know.
that's what I see in the piece of your wall. And then a bit of constructivism as well.
Yeah, I first went to Prague on invitation from Stanislav Lubensky to study with him in 1985, which is like, you know, no greater honor. And so I did everything I could to go there and to live there and to work with him and study with him. And, you know, he really kind of busted my chops, you know, because I didn't draw enough, and I didn't draw large enough, and I didn't put my full into it. And you know, anybody that knows me knows that my work changed after that first trip, and then trying to find my way with it. It helped to teach with them several times at Pilchuck in the 80s, and then continually, you know, work. He was working me over the whole time anyway. So, you know, he used to try to get me to give critiques and all that stuff. But my point is, like, his work with Yaroslava Brichtova was based in the Cubist sensibility, but also in the goal to create for people viewing their work what they describe as the illusory space. You know, there's the fourth dimension, which is the space that you see within the object that you can't inhabit. It's not inhabitable because it doesn't exist, but it's there anyway. And so as you walk around their work always changes, and out of that, you know, you see like many things, I think, in their work. And so all of that was really based in the European Cubism movement. That for them, it started in Wrocław, Poland, and then moved into the Czech realm, and then there was the Western European Cubism that Braque and Picasso and so many other people were involved in, plus the futurists in Italy and all that. And I love all that stuff. I just gobble it up, you know. It's just like I can't see enough of it. So yeah, you're right. It's a fascination for me. Yes?
I'm a big fan. And sir, you accomplished your goal with the show for me. When I saw this show, I just couldn't stop talking to the person in the front. So excited. As a jazz singer, as an artist, as somebody who's a carver, this piece is so exciting to me for my political science degree. The fact that you're dealing with something so dear to the Northwest School of Mysticism and the connection to the beginnings of hypnotism in the 1928s in Paris, and the role of the Salish mask in Paris that's never accounted for. This has really got my number. To the point I need to ask you, this is about Fred Astaire and Top Hat, or a dancer? Is it Marcel Duchamp? And the Green Machine, is it Picasso's portrait of the clarinet from 1911?
Maybe that's just Charlie Parriott.
You ascending the staircase. What are you hoping to accomplish with
Well,
connections?
it's you know, the idea is sort of as complicated as the composition in that it's about Fred Astaire, but there's also another figure in there,
Yes, there is.
and it's also
It's not Ginger in that 80-pound ostrich dress either.
the other character is sort of being absorbed by the larger character.
Right, here.
And so, but the other part of that is the subjective level is I have a lawyer named Fred, and he's sort of a shamanistic dude.
Yeah.
And I can only get a hold of him every now and then because he's always going off to this monastery. But he's like, you know, the program The Moth.
Yeah.
He was one of the early speakers on The Moth. He's also a contributor to The Onion, and he's one of my gurus in cool. And then, so it's a little bit about Fred, but the Fred Astaire thing was the beginning of the composition, because I think Fred Astaire is one of the most amazing American artists ever. I mean, he's unstoppable, and so I always admired him. And so I started with that, but then I worked in Fred and a couple of other elements into it. So.
Well, I hope the level of my question wasn't off-putting.
No, it's great. Thank you.
So I wanted to ask Cathy about the figures. I think it's always interesting when you take your paintings and whether they're on paper or whether they're printed, and then take them out and make them live on their own. What was that process like?
It was wonderful, actually, because it started, one of the interesting things about it is they have such a different presence than 2D work. So, and the funny thing was when I brought all the work down to the gallery and I went back to my house, it was like, where is everybody? So, I mean, they do have a different, so that it was really something to sort of see, what are these people like if they come out in their three dimensions? And,
I remember seeing them for the first time, the figures, and I thought, oh my God, these things have come alive, from all the work I've seen of Cappy's in the past. To see them actually standing there in presence, is really amazing.
Yeah, the scale is interesting too, because I sort of, one of the first figurines I had done when I did the little heavenscape, they were smaller, and I knew I wanted to work at a little larger scale so that you would have a sense of them as sort of more as an entity rather than a figurine, that they would feel a little bit more like a somebody.
There's a German artist named Volker Mers, and he makes tons and tons of small figures in clay. And I asked him kind of a similar question. I said, well, where do these dudes come from? And he goes, I don't know. I just started working with the clay, and then they show up and they start talking to me. And I was like, and his work is way out there, but he's just like, he's a strange guy. He said at one point he was in Istanbul and he decided to sleep on the median in the highway. for a night.
You can be in
Like, all right, go for it. But anyway, I think I was telling Cappy this sort of when she was really starting to do these. It's like I even said, who are these people?
One question I'd like to ask the artists is, what was this process of having this sort of three-way show like for you guys, and bringing your individual bodies of work together and giving them over to us to rearrange and mix up, and do you see, like, has it revealed anything to you, or how do you feel about it?
Well, I thought that it would be really interesting to have, I sort of like, I totally trusted you to make it work, and the thing that's been interesting to me is that I feel like the contrast is so big between the bodies of work that it helps you in a way to actually focus on them, because they are right next to something very different, but they, it's like Charlie's work needed to be separated because they're intimate and they're formal, and but I knew Dick and my work would work well together, and that was really fun to see, because I didn't know the body of work that he produced. He didn't know the body of work that I produced, and but to see how many of them really kind of worked great together, like that one, the sun and those yellow trees. That was like, wow.
Yeah, I have to say, from listening to you guys, I hadn't thought of it before, but on the continuum, Cathy is extremely being organic, based in folk art, and we all look at art, and we're a compendium of what our friends do, what our friends say, and what the artworks do, and what they say. And so she is extremely roundy, very, very narrative, folky. And then Charlie's half machine, half organic. So he's half sliding toward cap, half sliding toward geometry on a lot of these things. And then I'm getting the narrative. They are, I don't see anything as abstract. To me, abstraction is just narration pared down extremely hard. And so, those are trees for me. They could be figures, they could be lollipops, they could be plants. But so I'm a little more on the geometric, because I came out of geometry. I love geometry. Black squares ring my bells. And so I'm over there. Charlie's kind of in the middle, and Cap's on that side. So you have a continuum. We all tell stories in different things, but it's funny how, for me, it puts Charlie right in the middle between the capper on that side and me on this side. So that's interesting. I hadn't thought of Charlie. Charlie is the center point between over here.
I saw no sense in it. But it's really the stories we've been telling here today. It's like we do collaborate. And you wouldn't know it unless you were told it. The fourth character who's not here is Pavlina for me, and I wish she could have been here, because she's an extremely vivacious and wacky person, and she's got her own story to tell. But so for me, I'm sort of carrying her spirit with me when I bring the work here and showing her. But no, I didn't see any sense in it at all as far as like aesthetically, but what I love about it is that it's now. It's this block of time now, and we go through these cathartic things, and this is sort of Dick's life has changed radically in the past 5 years. Mine has changed. Cappy's has changed, but we've known each other for 40 years, But we've gone through some really strong changes, and this is kind of like, I would say it would be a postage stamp for a new era for us. So in that sense, I'm really glad we did the show. And I have to also say thank you, Sarah. I think worked extremely hard with Bill on lighting this room, Because I left here one night going, "Ugh, it's, you know, and, oh." So, yeah, it was, I mean, she worked really hard on resolving this room. I want to thank you. It's great.
Well, I think for a viewer, one of the things I really like about the show, what I normally don't like is if you have an anthology, which is a visual, you can have visual anthology, and you don't get enough of any one thing to know what the one thing was about. And I think you were brave in putting enough work in so that anybody that walks in can see what each chapter is about. And that I think was really important, so that you're not wondering, oh yeah, this is one thing, I wonder what the rest of it. You get a real sense of all the artists and what each one does in a real in-depth way.
Well, thanks, Barbara. I mean, they're really 3 solo exhibitions all mixed up, so. But any other questions? If not, I think, thank you guys for all coming out and supporting these artists and supporting the gallery and being part of this community. It really means a lot to us, and we appreciate you being here. Thanks. And congratulations to Dick and Cathy.
Help yourself to some food and